follows an extract from my book Fête Fatale, available from Amazon. Chapter 20, Part 1. There was no need to prepare breakfast that morning, as food was ordered and would be waiting for them at the Blue Willow tea rooms, so Beth, Drew and Benji made a leisurely start to the day. They were just about up and dressed when it was time to meet as arranged. Eager for news, everybody was prompt and the meeting was quickly underway. Eileen had allocated her staff to take charge in the cafe and she sat down to join the group. Understanding her need to know what had happened to Betty, she was admitted as a member. Also, having the boss of the tea rooms sitting with them promised them first-class service that morning. Without question, everybody expected DCI James to take control of the meeting. As the group eagerly looked towards him, he waved away his role as chairman. "This is Beth's territory. She's the boss here. Beth, you tell everybody what's been going on. Maddox and I will fill in the official jargon as you go along if we need to. Stand by, Maddox." Maddox seemed surprised to be included at this early stage in the proceedings and was busy buttering crumpets for Toby, who had attached himself to his lap. "It's taken a long time for us to figure out what's been going on because, to begin with, nobody knew that anything actually was going on," said Beth. "Once we did realise that all wasn't above board, matters were confused because we couldn't be sure if John had committed suicide or if the fatal substance was administered by a third party. In either case, the question was how. The problem was that we were right up to a point on both counts." "Excuse me for interrupting, but surely it's not possible to commit suicide and be murdered at the same time, or is it?" asked Kirsty. "That's just it. In a sense, that's exactly just what did happen. There's no doubt about the fact that John was nursing the intention to commit suicide. Emma found a stash of painkillers in John's wardrobe, yet we know for a fact that he never took such medication as a rule. Also, if they were there legitimately, why were they hidden away? However, the fact that the tablets were still there means that they weren't taken, and the toxicology reports state that he didn't die from such an overdose. We'll never know if he'd ever really have resorted to taking them," said Beth. "Why would he think of such a thing? Were matters as bad as all that?" asked Eileen. "No, not really, but a sense of financial hardship is relative. John had felt the property crash of recent years keenly and didn't like having to enforce economy at home. It also seems that he got wrapped up in some unsavoury business dealings abroad and was out of his depth," said Beth. "I didn't know about that. What sort of unsavoury business do you mean? I know Hyacinth mentioned a hint of something, but that's all," said May. "I've had Conrad brought into the station to help us with our inquiries, and from what he says it would appear that John's vulnerability in the foreign property market laid him open to a known scaremongery racket," said Benji. "I don't think he entered into business with them willingly, or at least not at first, but neither was he strong enough to resist their lucrative propositions. Maybe he was just too plain scared to say no. This made us wonder if he'd been quietly put out of the way, but there was no evidence of aggression or actual bodily harm. I asked Forbes to check carefully for puncture wounds, but there was nothing, not even any bruising. Which leads us right back to suicide. But evidence didn't support this theory either. John died after ingesting a fatal quantity of digitalis. John had made an appointment to see his optician despite having just had a new pair of glasses. Kirsty found that prolonged exposure to digitalis poisoning can cause visual disturbance, and so that was further confirmation that my thoughts were likely to be correct. We presumed that the form would be consistent with Betty's missing heart tablets. It was the obvious conclusion. Betty's death would also seem to support that theory and conveniently link the two deaths together, and Betty being the one to find John's body seemed to cement that theory nicely," said Beth. "We wondered if Betty had seen something on the day that John died, or if her missing heart medication was responsible for John's death in some way. I hate to think of such a kind, inoffensive person like Betty dying in a violent way. Was she murdered?" asked Eileen. Beth placed a reassuring hand on Eileen's knee. I don't think so. I really don't think so. It just muddied the waters for a time, that's all, said Beth. I asked Forbes to run the same tests on Betty and everything came back negative. It seems likely that she flushed her pills ad hoc down the loo, as old ladies will insist on doing, and so died of a long-standing heart condition in her old age, said James. If it weren't for John's death, I'd have had no questions about Betty's death, and I'm reassured that it really was owing to natural causes. She was old and more frail than she'd have people believe. I think that you can rest easy, Eileen, said Dr. Wainwright. You can see how much confusion and overlapping coincidence has cluttered the trail, said Beth. John didn't die as a result of taking heart medication, but the mistake was a simple one because the basic ingredients of the pills in its natural form was used. Digitalis is the compound used to make digoxin and digitoxin, which is widely used in the pharmaceutical industry. Foxgloves are common weeds and provide the natural form of digitalis, but we'd never have thought of this. This is where Kirsty provided us with an unexpected glimmer of hope. It was sheer luck that made me notice that the foxglove plants had been cut. If the plants had just been pulled out rather than cut, I'd never have thought twice about it, said Kirsty. Even then the way forward wasn't clear. It's not easy to ingest enough of the poisonous material without being very sick. The leaves act as a natural emetic, which usually makes you very ill, but prevents you from dying, said Beth. We'd said right at the start that it would be difficult because in whatever form, whether tablets or raw plant material, John would have had taken small amounts over a long period of time. He's hardly likely to commit suicide slowly, is he? Said Wainwright. And yet, in a sense, that's exactly what he did do, said Beth. That's just weird, said Henrietta. He did kill himself slowly, said Beth, but not intentionally. Of course, Jean is the obvious suspect, but it's not easy to hide foxglove plant material in a meal. I read that it tastes disgusting, and I gather that Jean never cooked, said Kirsty. There have been only 2 people who have had regular access to John and could have induced him to swallow something that regularly. Jean, as we said, is the obvious choice. She stood to gain from a massive life insurance premium, and she had daily access to his dietary intake. On the downside, the policy has been maturing for decades, so why now? Also, how did she administer the plants, said James. The other person was Conrad Jefferson. John had turned to Jefferson in his time of crisis and had a dog-like trust in him. Also, you need to remember that Jefferson had just come out of prison. Very often you hear that people come out of prison deeper in crime and with better contacts than when they went in. It was highly likely that Jefferson had corrupt business contacts, and his son was excellently placed at the centre of the web. If John was an embarrassment and needed removing, Jefferson could have fed him anything as an exotic lunch during their business meetings. John would have been so eager to be seen to fit in with the big boys that he'd have made himself swallow anything. He'd presumed that Jefferson had the same meal and would be desperate to appear cultured. It might have made him feel a bit queasy, but he'd probably put it down to nerves or his diabetes. But Hyacinth had never been to my garden. Conrad couldn't have known the foxgloves were there. I know that you can pick them from almost anywhere. They're on most of the roadsides around here. But it's my garden they were taken from, said Kirsty. We were stuck until we knew that it was your garden the poison came from, said Beth. I always said that I was sure that this crime had a local feel to it, and Conrad Jefferson conveniently married the big business angle and the local nature of the crime, said James. That reminds me, I've learned quite a lot from this little device. He pushed an external hard drive across the table to Carlton. I've erased all of the files, thank you. Once I'd got access to the laptop, I was officially in the clear, but it gave me a helpful head start. I'd have been sitting on my hands for a good while and would have been stuck without it. You know that news travels faster than fire in this village, said Henrietta. I've heard that Maddox drove Jefferson to the station and then, with a lady officer, took Jean there too. It has to be one of them. Who is it? Yes, Jean spoke to her neighbour and told them that it looked like he'd finally made an arrest. They were chatting together when the lady officer asked her to come to the station, said May. For the full book of Fête Fatale, available in paperback or as an ebook, follow the link in the cards in the description box or find details on my website at sharonbill.com. Thanks for listening.